So hello everyone, welcome back to the Science Shack, my mystery location for these photosynthesis videos. We went through last time the pigments, the chlorophylls, all the different molecules that are involved in photosynthesis. So today we're going to go into one half in this video of photosynthesis, the so-called light-dependent reactions. Massively important in how we get all the necessary energy that we need to manufacture glucose. Okay, so there are always going to be in these biochemistry lessons about 3 levels of difficulty. Okay, because this is really, if you're an A-level student, your first proper introduction into biochemistry. You will spot omissions and bits that are a bit vague and left out, because this has had to be that way to be, suitable for A-level. So I always give 3 levels in my lessons. I always give the bare minimum, cover the spec, what the A-level requires, which I refer to as the TOMI Early Learning Centre, my first biochemistry lesson. Okay, and it is the equivalent to the first toy car you get when you are a toddler. Okay, it still pretty much tells you what roughly a car is, but it's not exactly very detailed, and you certainly couldn't be an engineer. Okay, and you will spot gaps in that explanation. Okay, you will spot some missing pieces. Okay, I then give what I call sort of an intermediate level, which kind of answers a few more of the questions and makes a bit of better job of explaining what's going on. And that's kind of like the Meccano version. Okay, it's a bit more like a car, it's got a bit more detail to it, but still you couldn't drive down the road in it. And obviously if you really want to go further after these videos, I'll give you a little look-see, but then leave you to go and find out for yourself at the top level actually what really is going on. But that's really to be left for a biochemistry degree, let's be honest. Okay, so those are our levels, and if you are spotting bits that are missed out and you are spotting bits that are a bit confusing, good, that means you're understanding. Okay, it doesn't mean that you're completely missing it and that you've missed something vital. Usually it means you've just spotted a simplification. Yeah, so have a little bit of confidence in your own ability to understand. Okay, so context is really important. Where in the cell are we? Okay, well, we are basically within a leaf, within a cell, within a chloroplast. Within that chloroplast there are the thylakoid membranes, and on that thylakoid membrane, embedded in there, are these photosystems that we talked about in the last video. Okay, so the photosystems contain chlorophyll, and they contain these various different pigments, which, as described last time, pick up a range of wavelengths of light, right, and are there to absorb light, absorb energy across as much of the spectrum as they can. Okay, do look back at that video and the little bonus one from my conservatory if you are still unsure on photosynthetic pigments. Okay, so there's a lot of new definitions, new terminology in these particular lessons. Okay, first up, we're going to be talking about a thing called photoionization. Now, you should know what ionization means. Okay, it means knocking an electron off. Okay, and this is what actually happens in terms of chlorophyll. It's what actually happens to the chlorophyll in the light-dependent reactions. So a very simple definition of photoionization there is knocking an electron off chlorophyll using light. So ionization with the photo in front. Photo meaning light, and ionization meaning knocking off an electron. Okay? That leads to a process, because we can't keep knocking electrons off chlorophyll forever, it will run out of electrons. Okay, so we need to replace those electrons from somewhere. And from GCSE, you should know that it's water that's the first thing that goes into photosynthesis. Just look back at your GCSE equation. So there's this other word called photolysis, which means splitting of water with light. And it's from that process that we replace the electrons. Now, these electrons, whether they're being knocked off chlorophyll or replaced from water, are massively important into how this works. It's actually your first introduction into a thing called an electron transport chain, which is a common biological mechanism for generating gradients and generating energy. Okay, so that then leads us to a proton gradient. Now, you should know about gradients and osmosis and diffusion from previous biological study. A proton gradient simply means more protons in one place than another. Now, we said this happens on the membrane of the thylakoid. Okay, on, not actually one side or the other, in the membrane. All these photosystems and other proteins are wedged in the membrane. And all these high energy electrons, the photoionization, the photolysis, all that energy is there to build a proton gradient. Okay, it's there to push protons into the thylakoid membrane, right, and have fewer protons on the outside in the stroma. More on that in a bit. We've then got this word, chemiosmosis. Now you know what osmosis is, passage of water through a semi-permeable membrane. Chemiosmosis, obviously putting chemical in front of there, right? So the theory of circulation of protons through the thylakoid membrane via this protein called ATP synthase to produce ATP and reduced NADP. Now you should be familiar with what ATP is. It's the energy carrying molecule, but reduced NADP is probably new. And we're going to get to that in a minute. Okay, these ones basic, you should know this. Oxidation and reduction. Oxidation is loss, reduction is gain. Oil rig, as we all learned in our school chemistry. So when we talk about something being oxidized, we're talking about loss of electrons. When we're talking about something being reduced, we're talking about gain of electrons. Now in this process that can be confused, of course, with adding and taking away protons and hydrogens. And if there are any sophisticated chemists watching this, you go, hang on a minute, that doesn't look like oxidation to me. Believe me, it is. The electrons are moving as well as described. It all does work, but well done. If you spot that, you've just spotted one of the simplifications that we're making. Okay, so NADP and NADPH, you might not have come across this molecule before. It is a hydrogen carrying molecule that shuttles high energy hydrogens from the light dependent reaction, the LDR, to the LIR, the light independent reaction, which is the subject of the next video. Okay, and then of course ATP is the energy carrying molecule that is vital to all life. Okay, so there's a lot of new language. Okay, those are our definitions, and feel free to wind back to these definitions, right, and look at that page again every time I mention one of those words. Okay, that's the miracle of doing this by video. Okay, so here are a couple of the molecules. The one on the right there you should recognize, ATP, adenosine triphosphate. It's our energy carrying molecule. So this molecule here, molecule here comes off, this phosphate comes off. Oh, excuse me. This phosphate comes off here, bond breaks, and that is releases energy and makes ADP and this phosphate. Okay, so that's the ATP molecule. We're trying to make that, and this is NADP here. Okay, or nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate. What a mouthful. For A-level purpose, excuse me, you do not have to know that that's what that's called. Okay, you only have to know that it's NADP, and when you reduce it, it becomes reduced NADP or NADPH. They are the same thing. Okay, but you can spot some things in here that should be familiar. These here, look, these are both sugars, like in any other nucleotide. So this is ribose sugar. Okay, it's ribose, not deoxyribose. See two OH groups there. We've got phosphate groups, just like the sugar phosphate backbone in DNA, and then we've got bases. Bases here, look, adenine, right? You should recognise that as one of the bases in DNA. But it doesn't matter if you know the structure or what it is. You just have to know it is a molecule that ships high energy electrons and protons from one part of photosynthesis to the other. Okay, right. Tomy Early Learning Centre, my first electron transport chain. This is the simple version of what goes on. Now you might be thinking it doesn't look simple, but it is a very simple process. So initially, first stage, what happens, this represents one of those photosystems we were talking about earlier, this green blob here. Okay, a whack of light, a photon comes from some direction, whichever way up this chlorophyll is, right? Whacks that a photosystem, and it probably whack one of those accessory pigments on the edge of the photosystem. That starts to vibrate, and that energy then gets passed ping, 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 around to the reaction centre of the chlorophyll. And there's actually some quantum physics going on in that process, which obviously you don't have to know. Okay, you just have to know that it happens. Okay, ping, 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 into the centre, and that energy is enough to photoionize, to knock an electron off. To energize enough that electron to knock it off the chlorophyll. Okay, so here are those electrons being knocked off, and they're immediately taken away down this chain. Right, there is actually another protein in there called a mobile carrier. Right, we don't need to worry about plasticine, plastoquinone, all those kind of things. We don't have to worry about that. They get taken away off to the next protein. That, as we've said, can't happen forever, right? Otherwise, this photosystem would run out of electrons and become more and more and more positive, and it wouldn't be able to do its job. So those electrons have to be replaced, and they get replaced from the splitting of water. So here's our water, okay, and our water goes into the photosystem and gets split. And what comes out, well, the electron replaces the one that's been spat out this way. Protons come out, because if we take H2O and we steal its electrons, we're left with the oxygen and some protons, some H+. Okay, those get spat out here into the thylakoid space, and they contribute to this proton gradient, which is what we're trying to build. Okay, we'll see why at the end. Okay, so that leaves one atom of oxygen. So for every two H2Os that are split, you end up with an O2 molecule, and that's spat out as a byproduct. Right, pretty handy byproduct for us to stay alive. But that actually now explains two things in your GCSE understanding, your school understanding of photosynthesis, that water goes in and oxygen comes out. Okay, and those are the two bits we have to understand for this video. Okay, so once that's happened, we've got our photolysis or photolysis. Photolysis, water has been broken up. The electrons have replaced the ones that have been photoionized away. Right, these electrons have got tons and tons of energy. Now, in normal physics, if you excite an electron and then just leave it, it drops back down, loses that energy, drops back into what's called ground state, and it gives off a photon. Right, it just gives that out as a photon of electromagnetic radiation. In this case, that energy is used for something. It gets passed along to another protein, which pumps hydrogen. So that energy is used to pump hydrogen. Because